August of 2013, the United States was thinking we might have armed conflict in Syria because the Syrian rebels or freedom fighters were gassed. During that time frame, the Syrian Electronic Army kind of flexed its muscles. They had hacked a lot of Western reporters and Western press, but they started doing more threats online saying, hey, our hacks to date have been to steal information and they were attractive nuisances, but we're going to turn it up a notch if there's any armed conflict. And I think they would have done that. But you can also see the activities we're witnessing by Russia. Throughout the early part of my career, if we responded to what we would attribute as a Russian government intrusion or state-sponsored intrusion, every time we responded to that intrusion, the Russians would go away. You'd get like a gentleman's agreement, unwritten rules of engagement, whatever it was. If we caught them, they kind of went bye-bye to us. We couldn't observe their TTPs in real time because every time we responded, they kind of knew we were there. They could see the remedial drills that we were going through. Sometime in 2014, that drill changed. And I know about 10 weeks ago or more, Bloomberg wrote an article on the State Department was compromised, and it's the Russian government, and it's the Russian government's B team that did it. I don't know if it's the B team or not. My conclusion would be it could be the A team, but the rules of engagement have changed. They don't care that they're getting caught anymore. To me, that's sort of a big deal. When you see the same rules followed for 18 years and then suddenly it's whack-a-mole time. They're in every single day. That means they've also dialed it a notch. And if you haven't noticed, there's something going on in Ukraine right now, and maybe that's the reason for it. Now, 3 other reasons, but we're skipping them. I read a quote from Douglas MacArthur, and I'm not a great historian, but I have the liberty as I stand up here to paraphrase. And he said something about the history of failure in war can be summed up with 2 words: too late. And when you look at cyber, I don't think we're too late just yet. But we're not ahead of the power curve in our cyber defense against the offense right now. We're right in the hulking middle, and we got to do a little bit better to accelerate. While we cover that gap, I can think of nothing more important for our nation when it comes to cyber defense than getting attribution right. Now you can see what happened at Sony and how that kind of changed things. Everybody paid attention to it now because it was widely publicized. There was a hack by a nation state that released private emails from general counsel and C-level executives that led to the resignation of employees, and then as a final fanfare, let's just delete everything after we're done with all this. Those things in conjunction in a single intrusion, and then on U.S. soil, has never happened in my career. It might have happened at SANS, but when you put those things together and that happens, people pay attention. Risk profiles change. And you recognize, and at that time, if somebody had pinned me down and said, hey, Mandy, when's this going to happen again? If you asked me November 28th, I would have been, wow, I bet we see this again in December and in January, because what a great, if you're the offense, what a great return on your investment to do this to a large organization. I was wrong. But I think that the deterrent right now for a lot of these cyber activities is going to be outside of cyberspace, and you can even see the dialogue that we've had at the highest levels of our nation, and that as a sovereign nation, we say we reserve the right to respond to cyber attacks outside of cyberspace. That means we kind of need to know where we're going to throw the darts. We can't throw them with blindfolds on. So I think attribution is very important so that while we cover a gap from legacy security posture to where we've got to get to, we've got another arrow in the quiver. That's a good thing. But a second conclusion that goes along with that is Sony also showed me something that I'd never seen before. It was the first time I saw the government step forward and say, let's provide attribution. If you're hacked and you know it as a victim company, the odds are somebody else knows it. And when these things go public, the pendulum of public opinion swings to you're a victim or you are irresponsible. And we're seeing that tit for tat in the press right now with OPM and other folks. But it is so interesting that the President of the United States did attribution. I think it was intentional that we chose him to do it in a very public way and said Sony was breached by North Korea. And that immediately does impact that pendulum swing. I've talked to several Fortune 50 CEOs in the last month, and one of the things that they repeatedly say is the best thing I can get from the government, if something bad does happen, is stand behind me when I have to do that public disclosure if it's in fact a foreign military or foreign nation state enabled intrusion, because they want to influence that pendulum swing. And if it swings towards victim, you may see 50% less plaintiff lawsuits. So attribution is a deterrent? Absolutely. If you commit a crime and you know you might get caught on camera, You don't do it. I don't know about you, but I stop at red lights when I see the camera. We don't have the cameras in cyberspace right now. Now, there's three ways to get those cameras. I think they're all related. One is just go get them surreptitiously, find the technical assets and human assets and go get it. Anybody hacks us, we know exactly who did it, get attribution right. Second would be to get international cooperation and make sure we have the technical architecture to get proper attribution in countries like Vietnam and other countries that are developing their infrastructure. And the third is to somehow get rules of engagement, whether written or not, to be played by every country. I don't think there'll ever be world peace. I probably believe if we ever signed an agreement on cyber operations, people would probably violate, depending on your perspective, those agreements. But those are the three options we have. But I assure you of this, if we continue to operate with iffy attribution in cyberspace, we won't find a deterrent. Another conclusion, and every year people like me stand up and say the attacks are getting more sophisticated. I actually am not sure if that's true. Some of the most sophisticated breaches I ever responded to are in 1998 against Unix machines. Everything was kernel level. The Russians were masquerading in fantastic clandestine channels, top-notch stuff. But here's what I will say. Out of the blue, we were responding to criminal Russian attacks, and they were doing counter-forensics. It used to be they'd break in, get card data, leave the traces of evidence behind because they were out to monetize the card data. We responded to an intrusion in 2014 where suddenly, with 100% discipline, log files were edited. And again, Bloomberg published an article about 6 to 8 weeks ago about a financial service that was compromised, and Bloomberg said that they thought it might be the Russian government. It wasn't, in my opinion. However, all the criteria that I used to assign to attribute this might be the Russian government, almost all of it was met. So suddenly, Russian criminals overnight just decided, we're going to cover our tracks and get smarter about this. Not a good thing. If you're hacked and you know it, someone else does, and I think that when I polled about 250 of our responders saying, what was the summary of 2014, almost all of them came back with it was a year of disclosure. And I remember thinking, it was. But it wasn't the year of willful disclosure. Almost every single company that discloses doesn't get to do so on their time frame. They have to disclose because it's already leaked to the press somehow, and they're disclosing they've had a breach during the fog of war. And there's a lot of companies that stand up and think the truth will set us free, and we'll disclose things as we go through our investigation. And a lot of times that works, but in some cases that doesn't work. And unfortunately, the environment we have in the United States right now is the truth that sets you free is what plaintiff attorneys are picking, grabbing, and using those details for their lawsuits. So we're going to have an interesting time as a country to figure out if we ever do a safe harbor based on proper attribution, how we can alleviate some of those liabilities and pressures. But if you're hacked and you know it, take my word for it, this thing's probably coming live somehow sooner or later. And even without disclosure law pressures, the majority of CEOs, in fact, do want to disclose because they want to control the fact that this happened. And some of them genuinely are Boy Scouts and really do think we should tell the public, even though by the letter of the disclosure law we don't need to because it moves consumer data. So that creates a challenge right now, and I think in some ways part of the reason why we're disclosing outside of the window of best opportunity is because at times Western reporters are finding out, or Western bloggers are finding out about these intrusions and blogging about it, whether they're finding out about it through leaks or through even the offensive side or criminals that did the acts. They're getting publicized, and companies are finding out they were breached at the same time we are. Good news, since I've had all bad news to date, this is the good news. In the 0 days that we're finding, they're not spray and pray. We're not seeing the 0 days where somebody came up with it and suddenly said, let's hack the internet with this thing. What we are seeing, and I think it's just because of the high cost of finding exploits, is we are actually getting better. Software is harder to compromise. The exploits are then harder to find. And when the exploits are found, or those 0 days are found, I think they're going straight to nation states. So the one that we just reported on last week was by a group we call APT Group 3. We've been responding to them for over 10 years. There's a reason why it's APT Group 3. They're the third one we responded to since 2005. So probably by 2006, we've had a 9-year run responding to these guys, and they still have 0 day capability. So we're only seeing a couple, when we see the exploits that are 0 days being used, they're very targeted. That's good news for us. We don't all have to have our arms out trying to catch it. Now the problem is, The minute it goes public, the one day becomes the issue that we all have to worry about. But I do think if you see a 0 day, it's a nation state. One of the things we've learned responding to all these breaches is the minute somebody breaks in, your best chance of catching them is when they exploit you or when they initially drop malware, because by the time they're done getting the credentials, they're going to delete their malware, and then they're kind of, most people's data leakage prevention doesn't work as well as they want it to. These guys are good at the data exfiltration. They use valid credentials. 100% of the intrusions we responded to. A lot of people will say, well, why didn't the good guys just encrypt the data? When was the last time you've opened your email? Has it ever opened to you encrypted? The last time you queried a database, and I can look out there, I see a lot of database administrators. When was the last time the data was encrypted? It's encrypted in storage. But the minute valid credentials are used to access it, encryption is no longer a safeguard. The data is always presented unencrypted. So encryption doesn't solve this problem. The minute these folks get in and they get the identities, the user IDs and passphrases that are worthwhile to have, they're exfiltrating very well. Long story made short, the first inning of every attack is your best opportunity to get a blip on the radar, and after that, for the intrusions that we respond to at Mandiant and FireEye, these guys are a lot harder to detect every day that goes by. What's the sweet spot? In my opinion, it depends on who you are. But if you're under 10 minutes from alert to addressing it, you're in good shape. And in some cases, even if you're within 3 days of a breach, you're in good shape. I would not say that for the military. I wouldn't say that for government entities, quite frankly, because I think people are targeting you more often. Security poverty line exists, meaning small to medium business. It's hard to defend them. It's been my observation they don't have security staff. They outsource their security. And the vast majority of attacks, like if you right now go to SANS.org, it'll say something like 88% of all cyber attacks come from the US. That's not true. What is true, though, is there's an infrastructure in the United States that's been compromised. It is used as the front nodes to the real exploits coming at everybody. So it's not all our fault, folks, when you go to the Storm Center. It's the Chinese and the Russians and other folks operating on our networks. And the security poverty line is that the DoD does this pretty well. They might be out there thinking, no, we don't. You actually do, in my opinion. DoD's good, financial services is good. The defense industrial base is wildly improved and is excellent now because the Chinese were the most polite hackers in cyberspace. We got a 10-year run of them compromising the DIB, so we all kind of rose the watermark there and got really good. But after that, I actually do see a gap. And then when you get to small to medium businesses and other industries, the gap's sizable. Not to mention, even when you're doing it right, there's a gap. Here's 5 things. I hate calling them weaknesses, but these are things that could have mitigated some of the risk that the victim companies had. First, failure to detect the spear phishing or the malicious links. Approximately 90% of the breaches we responded to in 2014 was in fact a result of spear phishing or a malicious link emailed or delivered to an employee. The second is credential management. The Achilles heel for so many companies are, if I get one person at your organization to hack themselves in spear phishing, I'll get the local admin account. And the beautiful thing about that is you probably have this pristine image that every time you have a new employee come in, or every time you do a provisioning of a new computer, hey, it's a known, secure, pristine image, with the local admin account being the same on every single machine. So what happens is, bad guy breaks into one machine, gets that local admin account, laterally moves everywhere. A lot of folks will say, we don't want to be, we don't want anyone to log in and wipe all our stuff. One of the best deterrents to that is if one person gets spear phished, there are no credentials on that machine that allow that attacker to log in more broadly. So you'll see credential management is critical. I can tell you this, nothing makes a hacker more excited when they spear phish somebody and finds out they're on a Windows domain. It's great news. Network segmentation matters, protect what matters most. The only way to do that is segment what matters most by application, customer, dollars tied to it, importance of the data covered by statute, whatever it is. If you can put the cat back in the bag for the data that you want to protect, do it. And then a lot of people have shut off single-factor or dual-factor authentication, have gone to single-factor, even on the VPNs. Somehow, some way, the attackers have found a way to get to that web-based Citrix server that you just need a user ID and passphrase and you're in, because a lot of companies, for the traveling salesperson and for other folks, they just remove the RSA requirement or do a mobile or the 6 6-pin dual factor. And then, as a last resort, I've always read these experts that say, hey, if so-and-so had this software, they would have prevented this attack from happening. The reality is in a lot of the attacks we're responding to, there's a kit coming with them, and that kit shuts down our endpoint security safeguards. So we have to find a way to make sure the endpoint is actually protected from the admin account, that with 100% certainty the bad guy's been getting at every intrusion we respond to. So I have only 6 minutes to do trends, so I'm going to start speaking New Jersey auctioneer speed. So what are we seeing? For now, as we covered a gap from legacy technologies and protocols designed when security was not in the design plans to the future where I think it's going to be more designed, you think about it, we're making self-driving cars right now. I doubt somebody's going to release the software to do that without security baked in. We'll see, but I'm pretty sure we're going to address that. I am also sure that the time I have a stroke, my doctor's going to know about it from my watch before I even know I'm going down with a stroke. That's the kind of stuff that's going to get secured. That's the future, though. We got this legacy stuff we got to deal with. So while we're dealing with that, we got to eliminate the impact of breaches. I haven't found a security model that works better than this one when it comes to appraising where are people at with their cybersecurity program. But in general, you're constantly in a struggle to migrate to the top right, and we base it on risk. What do you want to prevent? We want to prevent cyber espionage into specific data or nation-state attacks that affect certain applications. So you're always working up and to the right. So here's the trends to do that. First and foremost, this sounds really boring, but it's really hard to do. Rule number one for all cybersecurity is protect what matters most, period. Instead of protecting the network, we have IDS, and we bought tools that protect by type of device. What we actually need is protect the data, protect the applications, or protect the people that matter most to the organization. And we do that with secure enclaving. You need network segmentation to do that. And all this stuff, as simple as it sounds, this is actually the hardest part of any remediation plan. This could be 2 to 3 years, and a lot of companies can't even do it. If you're in a defense industrial base and you're like, we must protect the data involved in this program, the first thing you do is figure out how many people and companies work on that program. Well, it's 9,000 people at 12 different companies. Go get your arms around that one. Diminishing returns are hit pretty quickly. But if you're, let's say, Starbucks, we're not going to lose credit data, we don't want to lose C-level email. If you're a retailer, we don't want to lose credit card data, we don't want to lose C-level email, we don't want to have a website defacement because it's just a thing we don't want to deal with. Nowadays, somehow, if you have your Twitter account hacked, it's deemed a sin, so you got to make sure you don't have your Twitter account hacked. But those are the things you got to protect now. It's all risk-based decision. It used to be governance-based. Right now, I'm seeing companies, and I've never seen better alignment at the board. Here's the 6 things we don't want to have become a reality. If compliance is considered something that's important to the industry, it's one of those 6 things. We don't want to be found non-compliant. And people are picking frameworks or standards. Since there's no widespread due standard of care, people are just picking a standard. So if something bad happens, they'll withstand third-party inspection. But I've never seen greater alignment than figure out what you don't want to have happen, and then make sure you do things to make sure it doesn't. Second is we're going from perimeter detection. It was always cheaper and easier and simpler to go to your choke points and do your protection. Get IDS out there, we see all the traffic, let's do something. Endpoint visibility was hard. Right now we need detection in the network. On the network devices, we need detection on the endpoint, because right now we're all relying on AV and it doesn't work, so we got to get to something better. And then we need detection if we're migrating to the cloud. And the best ways to do that is with all the things that I'm showing up there. If you don't detect the exploit, well, then you got to detect the malware that gets dropped. You want to do malware detection because if you only do exploit detection, the technology that only does exploit detection does you no good when you're rolling it out in a dirty environment. You were already exploited, so it's not going to detect what already happened, and the bad guy's already just logging in valid credentials or using his backdoors. You want to be able to do C2 detection because you've already got it. Lateral movement is the hardest, the holy grail. How do you know John Smith doing lateral movement, who's your employee from John Smith moving laterally, who's logging in from China or Russia? Data exfil and random hunting. Everybody's going from log management to security analytics. Very quickly, I'll give you this one. People have a SIM, it's sitting there, it's a bit bucket. They did it because there's a compliance driver behind purchasing that SIM. Now it's so bulky, they can't even search the darn thing, so security conscious organizations are buying SIM Part 2. We'll call it analytics, and just the data coming in is more useful for security operations and security decisions. And you're seeing, let's go from alert to fix with the second thing we bought called a SIM, and this hulking mass of bits in the first bucket is when the SEC shows up or the regulators show up and I can click on compliance reporting. It's happening. Hardest thing there is filtering the noise. How do you go from 4 billion alerts down to the 5 that matter every day? That is something that requires higher fidelity alerts. Our legacy tech isn't very good at that, but you know the trend. You don't want to